My name is Nina dos Santos. I'm the Europe editor at CNN, also correspondent and anchor for a number of years at the channel. I'm honoured to be here for this very important event in the travel calendar, moderating the WTM UNWTO's Ministerial Summit over the next 90 minutes. It is lovely to see so many familiar faces here in the room. Many of us last met a couple of months ago in September in St. Petersburg when I had the honour of moderating the 23rd UNWTO General Assembly. And on that particular occasion, we talked about the subject of education and jobs and the transformative effects that technology have had in that sphere. As many of you here in the room may well know, 2019 has been designated by the UNWTO as the year of education and jobs. And in fact, in St. Petersburg, the UNWTO chose to set the theme for 2020's World Tourism Day as the theme that we're going to be discussing today, which is technology for rural development. Now, before we get into today's proceedings, I just want to say from a personal note and from CNN that we are still incredibly proud to have this long-standing strategic partnership with UNWTO, and of course we're committed to be there for this long journey with both the WTO and the stakeholders in the travel and tourism sector to create sustainable growth that many can benefit from, not just from the few. Now, today's Ministerial Summit, as I said, will be focusing on the subject of rural development. We welcome about 100 leaders in this room from the private and public sector. Be warned, over the next 20 minutes, we're going to hear from 20 people within the industry. We're going to start out with a couple of keynote speeches from experts in the field and eminent leaders on the subject. Then we're going to move into a private panel, which will be discussing the infrastructure needs, the planning needs that need to be put into place, and that'll set the stage for the ministerial debate, where we'll have more than 13 participants among a select group of country leaders to take the baton on. And I hope very much that our participants can keep their points of view concise, to the point. I hope that this debate will manage to leave us stimulated, enlightened, but also with a framework for the subject at hand, which, as I said, is technology and rural development. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome onto the stage Simon Press, the director of WTM London, obviously somebody many of you in the room know very well, and he's going to lay out the stage. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Ministers, distinguished guests and colleagues. A very warm welcome to the WTM London and UNWTO 13th Ministers Summit. I'm very proud to take part in this influential event that we have developed along with the UNWTO for the last 12 years. As you can see from the calibre of those taking part, tourism ministers from around the world, industry leaders and innovators, and the packed audience, the significance of the summit is widely appreciated. It offers a unique open forum to discuss crucial challenges facing our industry and enables decision makers and investors to drive changes and improvements. Over the years, the Ministerial Summit has tackled significant issues such as over-tourism, safety and responsible travel, along with topical challenges facing our exhibitors, such as major events and how they benefit tourism as well as destination branding. Bringing together the leaders from public and private sectors to discuss in one global session original ideas and concrete takeaways opens up the possibility of new policies and different ways for our industry to make positive, sustainable progress. In 1980, the inaugural World Travel Market hosted 40 countries, 221 exhibitors. It was attended by 9,000 trade visitors. Quite a good start, you might think. The progress we have seen is remarkable. WTM London now facilitates more than £3.4 billion worth in industry deals, welcomes 5,000 exhibiting companies from 182 countries and regions, and over 50,000 participants over the 3 days. Our growth mirrors that of the global travel industry. UNWTO figures show that international tourist arrivals grew 5% in 2018 to reach 1.4 billion, 2 years ahead of long-term forecasts. Export earnings generated by tourism grew to $1.7 trillion, up 4% on 2017, outpacing the world economy. 2018 was the 9th consecutive year of sustained growth. Tourism now represents 7% of global exports. Our overall prospects for the industry are extremely positive, but there are many challenges ahead. Rural areas around the world face depopulation as people move from the countryside to the cities. But tourism can help revitalise these regions. Rural development and tourism will be the theme of World Tourism Day 2020 on the 27th of September. So ideas and solutions generated by this year's Ministers Summit will build those foundations for many of the UNWTO's actions and initiatives around the world next year. We are looking forward to the informative and far-reaching debate today with our panellists' extensive experience and a range of perspectives generating unique insights. Following last year's successful new format, as we've just been told, we will start the private sector leaders outlining the challenges and opportunities. Our panel of ministers will then join the debate to discuss the solutions and ways forward for the tourism industry and rural development. I'm delighted to see the room filling up, and it's becoming quite packed. Today is going to including so many ministers, it reinforces the importance of the unique ministerial-led summit and today's topic. I would now like to hand over to UNWTO Secretary General Zurab Pololikashvili. Ladies and gentlemen, it leaves me to wish you all an inspiring and productive summit. Secretary General, please come to the stage.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, WTM. Thank you, CNN. Nina. So happy to have so many friends with us this morning, and I'm not going to talk about how WTM is important. About numbers, Simon presented very interesting and impressive number. I'm not going to talk how tourism is important and how tourism can create jobs. First of all, I want to greet and again express my happiness with honorable ministers. We have many of them, they are coming because of traffic jam. I'm sure that we will have more guests today. But the main objective and main theme for us is to talk about rural tourism and innovation in rural tourism. As you know, and as Simon mentioned, next year we are going to launch the Year of Rural Tourism, and I talked with many of you about this issue, and we together saw how important it is to decentralize big cities, because the concentration of tourists now today is 60–65% are visitors in urban and big cities and capitals. This is from one hand. From the another hand, the idea is to expand and to support regional development, and there is a lot of space and a lot of opportunities outside of cities, and there we see a lot of potential, and I'm sure that we can do many interesting things. We have, and let me to share our vision, how do we see and how we can promote and support regional development and rural areas, to create new destinations, to support people, to support families who live with tourism. And let me to express 5–6 points, how do we see and what we need to do. First of all, it's a great opportunity to have you all, and we will have 2 hours to discuss it and to structure how can we support our member states to use bad and good experiences, how to develop rural tourism and how to create new destinations. The first, of course, it's a very important part is investments. We need more investments outside of cities. the same time, innovation, one of the main topics for today, and the experts will tell us more how we can use innovation and new technologies to support, again, families to promote and to develop the activities in the rural area. Third of all, without education, it's impossible to support, and without human capital, it's impossible to develop rural areas, and this will be another very strong part. When I mention investments also are very important in infrastructure, and I think this will be another thing where we need support of governments. Private sector, another very important pillar. And I'm very thankful that WTTC, and in this case, the president of WTTC, Gloria Guevara, is attending, and your presence is very important because you represent, Gloria, more than 500 top companies, and we need, and I'm sure that we can use them to support this very aggressive and very challenging and ambitious project. And you know that we always are happy to have you and support your member states as you are supporting our member states to develop this interesting project. So let's use this opportunity. Let's use that we have numbers of ministers who has a much more experience in tourism than and we have, and let's open the floor and let's talk and discuss all things we can share among us and talk, and then we will see. I'm sure that we can have some recommendations how to use innovation and how to develop, and all year we will do all our events outside of big cities, and there we need your very active participation, and I'm sure that's why we are here. So thank you again, Simon, for this excellent organization, to all guests, all attendances, and thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Secretary General, thank you very much for setting the scene here today. So, it's time now to move on to the first part of our Ministerial Summit, and that means we're going to start hearing from the input of experts. Now, as many of you in the room may be aware, Saudi Arabia is a country that has embarked upon an ambitious, high-profile tourism campaign which feeds right into this very subject at hand, encouraging visitors to familiarize themselves with the country, but also with travel destinations outside of the urban areas. And I'm delighted to welcome onto the stage for a special presentation His Excellency Ahmed Al-Khatib, the President of the Saudi Commission for Tourism and National Heritage. Your Excellency, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am delighted and honored to speak to you today. We are the last country in Earth to open their doors for tourists. So we welcome you all to come to Saudi Arabia. I would like also to thank the CNN and the WTM and my dear friend Zurab for giving me the chance to speak. When I was asked to chair the Tourism Authority in Saudi Arabia, I looked at the numbers. I've been a banker for 25 years, investment bankers, and I know how important investment to any country is, and I know what does number means. I headed the health in my country as a Minister of Health in 2016, which a job that is not exciting at all, but I was asked to do it. But our job here is full of fun. I'm very happy to chair the Tourism Authority in my country. Tourism is growing across every continent. From all the jobs created last year in the planet, in all sectors, 1 in 5 were in travel and tourism, a total of 319 million jobs. That really tells us about the opportunity and responsibility we have as leaders. Tourism gives people the opportunity to live and work where you want, the opportunity to empower communities, to promote sustainable growth. More importantly, is to allow people to be proud of their roots, their heritage, and their countries. This can only have a positive impact on society and benefits all. Tourism is booming. As Saudi Arabia opens our doors, we might be late, but I guarantee that we are going to make an impact. We are proud of our heritage, our history, our traditions, and our people. That is why we want to share them with the world and introduced the new tourism visa in last September. Our goal is to grow and grow fast. We aim to attract 100 million visits and create 1 million new jobs by 2030. We aim to make an impact. This is an important opportunity for Saudi Arabia, and we are here to learn from the global community to make our growth sustainable. Today's summit focuses on how tourism can be used to empower rural communities, and I look forward to hearing and learning from the experts gathering here today. Many countries want to offer tourists diverse alternatives away from cities by developing their rural communities. In Saudi Arabia, over 80% of our 34 million population lives in urban areas, and this trend will continue globally. So we must ensure our rural communities are not left behind, and their ways of life are protected with new economic opportunities. Tourism can certainly help. Saudi's rural communities are unique and diverse, from the mountains in the north and the south to the vast desert of the Empty Quarter and the Red Sea, untouched beaches. We are the custodian of 10,000 historical locations and several UNESCO World Heritage Sites. From the desert camps of Bedouins traditions to the colorful flowers festival of the Asir Mountains, our rural areas have much to offer tourists looking for new and authentic culture experiences. Technology can play an important and exciting role. Innovators must work hand in hand with governments and NGOs focused on environmental and social issues. This partnership approach is how we want to build a fast-growing but sustainable tourism sector. Airbnb is one example of a platform that could enable our visitors to enjoy the most unique and welcoming stay in rural areas, where hotels are not yet developed but accommodation is needed. Saudi population is one of the most digitally connected in the world. However, technology-empowered rural tourism comes with both opportunities and, of course, challenges. Last week, at the G20 Tourism Minister meeting in Japan, the heart of our discussion focused on building sustainable tourism. We must ensure the right policies are in place to protect rural areas from the challenges of over-tourism. We have to ask, how can technology help in this? 2020 is a very important and exciting year for Saudi Arabia. As a chair of G20 Travel and Tourism, you have my total commitment to put tourism at the center of the world leaders' discussions and build bridges with key people, including the private sector. With our presidency, we will help our sector worldwide and take it to the next level. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you, Your Excellency, for those fine words. It's now time to talk about the very technology that you heard His Excellency referred to. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Saudi Arabia's power in terms of its connectivity of its young population. Well, just as the dollar is often viewed by the intrepid traveller as the passport to the world, data, and in particular big data, is the new currency for countries who are seeking to offer intrepid visitors the most tailor-made and memorable experience, perhaps encourage them to go back many times to different countries. So we really couldn't have this panel today without talking about the subject of big data. And so I'm delighted to welcome to the stage our next keynote speaker, who is Santiago, the Chief Executive Officer of Mabrian, who's going to be talking specifically about this, about data-driven decisions for sustainable tourism development. The stage is yours, Mr. Camps. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation, Nina. Also, thanks a lot to the UNWTO Ministers World Travel Organization, especially to Natalia Bayona, to help to give the opportunity to be here today sharing our experience. I'm the Santi Camps. I'm the founder and CEO of Mabrian. What's Mabrian? Mabrian means making bright analytics, and it's a technological company that is changing the decision-making paradigm in the tourism worldwide nowadays. We are the gap between the data and the information. So what we are doing is to collect a lot of data, to structure the data, to process, to aggregate it, and to convert in something that is useful to make better decisions. So that's what we are doing. Let's see. We are absolutely convinced that data-driven decisions could help to generate a more sustainable development of the tourism by taking decisions based on knowledge. So we have created a tool that's not big data theory. That's big data made reality. So we have created a tool that is able to understand and predict the tourism dynamics worldwide, and is something that is really useful and is really being used from some destinations nowadays. We'll see some examples later, but the key point here is that understanding the dynamics and understanding what's happening, you can make better decisions to achieve the goals you want. So, if the goal is to have more sustainability, or to spread the impact of the tourism among the territory, it's something that it could be afforded. So after that, we will see some examples of it. Another important thing is that nowadays the tourism dynamics or the market is changing very fast. So there are a lot of unexpected events that happens every day. So it could be political decisions, could be the climate change, could be a tour operator crash that changes the map of the tourism. So you have to understand, you have to be able to understand how to react to these things, to adapt your destination properly. Also, as we are saying, the visitors expect to have every day more real and more authentic experiences. So we have been able to understand each of the target segments coming to our destination to offer them a better experience. So the big data helps both sides of the tourism. Both the local communities to get a better distribution of the impact, and also the visitors to have more authentic experiences. Well, in Mabrian we say that the intuition era is over. What that means? That means that we have a lot of data nowadays. So do you know that the whole amount of data that humanity created until the year 2002 is now generated in just 48 hours, in 2 days? we are generating the same amount of data than in 2,000 years. So data, we have a lot of data. The important thing here is to convert that data into information. That's a step that is technological step. That's what we are doing. Then we have to get the information and convert into knowledge, and the knowledge into intelligence. And these two steps are related to change the way of work inside the organizations. Even we are able to, when we are able to understand the dynamics, real dynamics, we are able to predict the future. So do some predictive models that will help us to understand and to achieve the goals we have. What kind of data we have? For instance, in the cases we are seeing now, we have multiple data sources. Some of them are related to transactional data. That data is saying what happens, and some of them are related to behavioral data. The behavioral data says why it happens. So you have to be able to understand the two things to understand the dynamics properly. If we put all together in a cycle like this, we see we can have data from all the full travel cycle, from the inspiration to the decision to the behavior and to the opinion. So we can have data from social media to as inspirational way, people searching flights but not booking yet, comparing prices, booking the flight. Then we can know how do they move inside destinations using mobile tracking, how they spend in the destination thanks to some agreement with MasterCard to be able to understand the spend patterns, how they feel, how are the perception of the tourists coming to destinations. So you can understand very well what's happening and why it's happening. Obviously, all this data is anonymized data. It's always aggregated, anonymized data that allows to understand the dynamics. And when you cross that data, when you cross the data sets, you have been able to understand some real valuable patterns. So let's start with a real example. I think is the better way to understand what we are talking about. That's a real case of Colombia. Colombia in 210 creates a network of heritage towns. It's called Red de Pueblos Patrimonio, to promote the rural development of the tourism. So we can see here some information. That's the global that indexes are perception indexes. That measure the climate perception, the visitors, the security perceptions, the touristic product satisfaction, and the auto satisfaction. If you compare all these indexes with Colombia, Bogotá, Medellín, and the Red de Pueblos Patrimonio, we can see that in most of them, almost all of them, the Red de Pueblos Patrimonio has gained better perception for the visitors. So the visitors like the most the Red de Pueblos Patrimonio. We compare with the other offices, other touristic offer in Colombia. Another important thing, if we analyze the growth of the tourism in Colombia, we can see that on average they increased it 10% during 2018. But in the same period, the Red de Pueblos Patrimonio increased more than double, 26%. And if we see again the touristic products people are talking about when visit the different parts of Colombia, we see that the Red de Pueblos Patrimonio is the one that has the most heterogeneous interests, the most that is not focused in just one or two touristic products, but generates a lot of interest in all the touristic products. So here you can see also the rural tourism board in Colombia. We can see what are the main international markets interested into the red de productos patrimonio. Okay. So we can see, for instance, here that Spain is the most important. United States is the second. Brazil and Mexico are the international markets interested in. So also we can see even what kind of tourism, what kind of touristic product they are talking about, in order to promote that target segment you are interested in. We can see here how are distributed in terms of origin market at interest to better campaigns to increase that touristic product. And finally, you can see we can see how they spend also, how their spend is distributed, so we can identify the better target segments to come and to attract, because we don't want quantity, we want quality touristic product, and even we can analyze the connectivity, flight connectivity, and I'm finishing now, just to understand what are the touristic attractions or the touristic origin markets we can go. So I finish here because we have very few time. But just to understand that we have all this with three data layers of the 8 layers of data we are able to process. Thank you very much.
Santiago, thank you. Thank you very much. Santiago Camps, thank you very much for laying the foundations for our panel. So now, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to welcome to the floor our panelists to discuss this critical issue of planning, infrastructure, technology, and tourism for rural development. I'd like to ask Anne Don Bosco, Head of Growth at Google, to join us upon the stage. Debbie Hindle, the Managing Director of For Travel. Diana Munoz-Mendez, the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Partnerships at MasterCard. Gary Stewart, the CEO of Wayra UK, you may know as the Technology Accelerator of Telefonica. And last but not least, Sarah Pastor, Managing Director at Destination Media Adara. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. And now we're going to head into the private sector debate. Well, welcome. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's start out by bouncing off of that subject of data and how technology can be so transformative for rural development. Diana, let me come to you first, because obviously MasterCard can play a huge role in this. You have various initiatives at play to try and stimulate rural development and make sure that local people can benefit from tourism. What do you think the opportunities and technologies really are to try and bridge that urban and rural divide that we heard a number of our previous speakers talking about, the fact that over 60%, as the Secretary General was saying, of tourists don't go to rural areas, even if they may get a better holiday from it, they go to the urban environments. Dana?
That is right, and a lot has to do with what we just heard about data. So there's a lot of data, there are a lot of campaigns, there's a lot of incentive to go into the major cities, that's where the airports are located, etc. We understand the importance of big cities, but we understand that there is a great possibility to use this data to actually steer these travelers into surrounding areas, rural areas around these key destinations in cities. I think that what is critical is that we create the right infrastructure and we create the right traveler journey in those rural areas. So this is what MasterCard is doing. MasterCard, even though it has a major effort supporting smart cities, we also believe that people have to be happy, thrive, wherever they choose to live, being their hometown, these rural communities. So financial inclusion is at the core of what we do. And we have a program that is called the MasterCard Farmers Network. And with that, what we have created is actually a platform that digitalizes payments, creates a marketplace, creates also a community of buyers and different parties in the rural ecosystem, buyers, sellers, and it also keeps track of the financial activity of these farmers. So people that have been removed from having these platforms or these tools that technology bring actually can benefit from it.
And you're the head of Grow, aren't you, at Google? And you've actually got a background in UK public policy as well, because you're at the Public Health Service here in the United Kingdom. So if you had to put your public-private partnership strategic hat on, where would it send you on this particular subject as a journey?
So I guess public-private partnerships make so much sense, and so at Google we've been working with a lot of kind of ministries of tourism. So we've been doing it in Greece since 2015, and we've used that to deliver face-to-face trainings in 80 cities, and that's been really successful, and it's led to, with the online training, 120,000 people being trained around tourism, which has been really successful for the kind of hotels and so on. And now we're using that approach and expanding it to Japan, also to Kenya, and having conversations around there. So I think the real opportunity is to understand what's the kind of public incentive, what are they trying to achieve, and from a private kind of perspective, understanding what can we actually offer. So there's things around the kind of training that we've been doing, but also looking at Google core products. So how can we help people through Google Maps, through Google Search, and so on to achieve those objectives.
And Debbie, you run a consultancy company that advises governments on how to collect this data, how to use this data, how to tailor-make their tourism products for tourists.
Correct, yes.
What's your message?
My message, I think, is that rural tourism is not just about rural tourists themselves. As a strategy consultancy and communications agency, we look at the entire visitor economy. I'm also a trustee of a charity called the Travel Foundation, which does public-private sector work. And examples of the work they've done in the last 5 years, they've done a campaign called Taste of Fethiye in Turkey, where with tour operators and the industry, they've encouraged local farmers to produce goods for the hotels in the cities, in the mainstream resorts, and had a small-scale tourism into the rural areas with people who are informed about agriculture and the local culture and economy. And that type of connection means that the farmers have increased their income by 24%. More than $1 million worth of fresh goods is now being bought locally, reducing carbon impact. So those sorts of private sector, public sector initiatives means that the visitor economy has had a massive impact on the rural region, but you're not necessarily driving rural tourists to over-tourism. In rural environments, over-tourism can be one person in a city on a Sunday, in a village on a Sunday. So it's very important that the balance of the rural tourism development considers all of the impact of the visitor, wherever they may be in a country.
Right, and part of that is also feeds into education campaigns and so on and so forth on both sides. But Gary, infrastructure is key here, isn't it? I mean, that's the issue. So the great thing about this subject, and I'm so glad that the UNWTO is highlighting it, is that it can keep communities together, create sustainable growth, prevent the migration to cities for work and so on and so forth. But that's only if you actually are able to be connected.
Yes. So I mean, Telefonica, particularly in Latin America, we have something called Internet para Todos, which is internet for everyone. And the idea is that there are just so many people throughout Latin America that don't have really good connectivity. So Telefonica has been working with Facebook to see how we can kind of improve that situation using existing technologies. And I think that this is going to go even farther in the future, because I was recently at a conference that Huawei did, and with 5G, everyone is wondering how 5G could actually help to improve that kind of rural connectivity that's a problem right now. And I think that when you look at kind of like what the Chinese are doing through Huawei and what the Americans are realizing that they haven't done, everyone is realizing in part that connecting local towns is going to be very important going forward, because from a voting perspective, there are just so many people, whether it be Brexit in the UK or Trump supporters in the US, that feel that technology has somehow left them behind. And so it becomes incumbent not just on government but also corporate to figure out how we can bridge that gap.
But then again, bridging the infrastructure gap is also a political hot potato
potatoes you alluded to, right? So where do you think it's going? Because obviously there's going to be a completely different response in different countries. The whole way how this works is by joining up the system, isn't it?
So one of the things that we're doing besides the connectivity play is also trying to build technology hubs in places outside of central cities. So in Spain, I think we have, I don't know, like 40 or 50 outside of Barcelona and Madrid. You also have it in places like southern Spain, Galicia, etc. In the UK, we have it in places like Oldham, which is the most deprived city in the UK. So the idea is you have to give people not just the connectivity, but also the ability to develop their businesses. I think that one of the things that we've seen in terms of tourism is that a lot of rural places or people that work in rural communities, they don't know how to get the marketing out there. Even if they had the connectivity, it's how do you market a product? Is there a platform that allows me to use this product? So we have one startup, which is two Moldovan entrepreneurs that basically what they've done is they've created a platform that allows vineyards and wineries around the world to basically connect, and they do all of the kind of marketing and get the kind of critical mass of users, and all you as a small producer have to do is basically make sure that your information is up to date, and they'll send you the tourists to your local destinations.
Right, so as long as there's a coordinated approach, and I'd like to get into the coordinated approach and marketing strategies in a second, but I want to come to you, Sarah, because you mentioned something that prompted something in my mind, the connectivity of certain cities. I'm thinking notably about, say, the lampposts in Barcelona being Wi-Fi hubs and so on and so forth, and it reminded me of the fact that you used to work at Cisco Systems, I believe, right? And that was their project. So the question I have is, if you're not in Barcelona where the Wi-Fi lampposts are feeding back big data about travelers and where they're going, what they want to see, if you're in somewhere where you don't have the connectivity and you don't have the data, what do you do?
That's a very good question. And actually the way we approach it is two, from different point of view. One point of view with rural destinations, we look at the origin markets data. Because what happens to these rural destinations is that they don't have the awareness. Travelers, they don't know that that destination exists. So what we leverage is the learnings on how travelers in the key origin markets where these destinations they want to attract tourism, understand their patterns, how they are behaving, what type of experiences they are looking for, so that we can help be this matchmaker between the demand and the offer. And the second point of view is we collaborate with governments, these local and rural governments, in order to help them create their let's say private data ecosystem, meaning we already have the technology, we're already gathering data from all different types of hotel chains, airlines, GDSs, meta searches, but what we are missing is these local data partners in these rural areas, so we can create specifically for them their own data partnership, so that then they can learn from this data that we are collecting, act on it, and measure and see if what they are doing is actually working.
And what do you think that private sector companies need in terms of a consistent conversation with governments?
I think it's that really understanding the different perspectives. So it's really great to have UNWTO and other people who can connect us across those different markets and across different areas, because from a kind of global central perspective, it's understanding what works from a global perspective, but also understanding local needs and making sure that we design what works for that particular region. So not just kind of copycatting, but really working with the local markets to understand that. So I think that opportunity for consistent conversation is really kind of brought about through organisations like UNWTO and this kind of forum to actually bring people together.
Diana, I want to ask you a question about, obviously in today's cashless society, if we move forward with increased connectivity, digitization, tourists being able to go to visit rural areas where before cash was king, how does the dynamic change in today's contactless payment environment?
Yes, it's the digitalization of payments, which is an incredible benefit in terms of operational benefits as well as convenience. So as we're attracting visitors into rural areas, they do have the expectation that they're going to be using their digital wallet, their contactless card, they're going to be paying with this means of payments, credit or debit. And what we want to ensure is that there is enough digitalization of payments in in as many merchants, small merchants, as you will find in these locations, because then the benefit, the economic benefit of tourism will touch and impact not only the big hotel chains, the big restaurants, but it will actually impact the small restaurant at the corner, the small souvenir shop. So with that, what we have done is create actually a whole consulting program where we're actually working with acquirers and other parties, including governments, to actually show how important it is to actually bring this type of technology to smaller merchants. And for that, we work with the full ecosystem, because if you hear something in common from all of us and from different angles, is connectivity. So connectivity means that we all have to work together. The solutions don't just come from one data set. The solutions don't come just from one technology or one network. It might be a telecom network, but it might be a payment network as ours. And I think that coming together, the best solutions that we have engineered with different stakeholders, where governments are critical. We're having the good understanding from WTO what is actually needed at the global scale, or through WTTC and our partners there, help us create scalable solutions.
Debbie, this also requires an educational response out among rural communities, as I was saying before, to accept digital contactless payments or various digitized payments, doesn't have to be contactless, as opposed to cash. I mean, where are we on that journey? How much resistance is there, and how can governments play a role?
I think governments play a role in providing the facility to help rural tourists to understand what's going to be needed for the future. So governments obviously can lead and provide the insight and the expertise. It's very difficult, I think, for governments to take it holistically. You were asking about collaboration earlier. I think governments themselves often need to collaborate more between themselves in order to provide this data together, because tourism can sometimes sit in a silo, whereas it needs to sit with agriculture and the finance department and the transportation department. There's a very good report published earlier this year called The Invisible Burden by Cornell University that talks about the fact that there is a gap between what we measure as tourism in terms of data and the areas that we should all be really evaluating to understand the real impact of tourism on our economies. And I would call on any private sector company here, Google and MasterCard, to support governments in helping to understand the extra questions they need to ask, so they can then deliver that insight back to the rural communities.
Yeah, and I can add an example. That's one area where we're working in terms of providing the data and actually training and education through MasterCard Center for Growth, for inclusive growth, as well as other partnerships, right, where we are actually providing data for good. So, for example, in the U.S., we're working with a think tank that is actually looking at rural areas, and they have created these data analytics that actually can look at depressed areas, rural areas, and start analyzing different variables and see, was it actually their telecom access, which is higher and better than another area that has not actually improved as much? Was it actually that there were universities, so there was more education in that rural areas that actually improved the prospects for that area? So it's truly something that I understand your call. We, the private sector, as we have data and as we have initiatives to drive inclusion, should be very engaged, and that's part of a lot of what we do.
I'd like to add, because I completely agree with what you said, and last week I was at the European Travel Commission Global Assembly, and most of the CEOs of the destinations here in Europe, they were saying the same thing, like they're struggling with the benchmarks, with the KPIs on how they are measured, because they keep on only being asked, oh, how many passengers are you driving to your destination this year? And when you think about it also from the rural areas, you want to avoid to fall into the problems that now a lot of mature destinations and cities are having with the overload crowdedness.
Yeah.
So coming into how we define the benchmarks and the KPIs to measure further than only passengers, how to include the quality of the passengers and how long they're staying, how much they're spending. So this is actually...
So if you had to, let's just get that nailed down though. If you had to lay out 5 to 10 KPIs, which ones would they be? So repeat visitations, length of stay, income of the traveler, what they spend, what are you looking at?
The 5 that we see more common, they are related to the quality versus quantity. So length of stay, how much they are spending. The decongestion, getting to people not only to go to the main cities, but also actually going to the rural areas. And then you can look at it from a point of the percentage of bookings that you're seeing in your destination, how much people are booking the cities versus the rural. We also then look at the seasonality, when they are coming, so that actually, again, you're helping through the whole country. And we are also looking at the culture, the values, the tradition, and all. If you look at the rural tourism, one of the unique things that you want to preserve is that they keep on being sustainable, that they keep their traditions, and not just because of throwing tourists, you're getting, you're losing your values and traditions.
And this is the whole point, because this particular subject feeds into the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals, empowerment, particularly female empowerment, which we haven't yet tackled and will. Sorry, Gary, we do have a female-heavy panel, actually, as you've probably noticed. And as well as we said before, sustainable development. But so much of this involves having icons, as you said, education, partners. You yourself are a former entrepreneur. You've coached many entrepreneurs themselves. I mean, what is your message if you want local entrepreneurs? Because we're not just talking about people Airbnb-ing their houses. We're talking about, as you said, whether it's Moldovan vintners trying to make a whole experience out of a country that thus far hasn't benefited from a huge amount of tourism. What can companies like yours do? I mean, how much do you get on the ground?
Well, what I was going to say is I think that, we work a lot with the local councils in the UK when we were going to set up a space outside of central London. Because in London, probably about 70% of all of the investment goes into basically 2 zones, Zone 1 and Zone 2 of London. That's where all the investment goes. And I think that if we want to kind of change that, then probably the local councils or the rural areas have to create incentives for people to switch from something that's already kind of very, very easy. If I'm an entrepreneur, I'm trying to survive, my chances of survival are very limited, I'm going to go for the quick wins. And a quick win is trying to work with the Greater London Authority or something like that, rather than trying to go to a council that's far out, where it's going to take 3 years for me to get anything done, and the system isn't really set up for me to be able to do it, where the incentives also aren't really clear, but the disincentives are clear. So I think that a big part of this as well is to try and make it very, very attractive for entrepreneurs to want to stay in those jurisdictions. And then I also think that the thing that would be really interesting from a kind of business point of view is differentiation. Like when I lived in Spain, it just seemed like all of the small areas and cities were competing with each other. So Barcelona was competing with Galicia, competing with Malaga, and it's kind of like, shouldn't there be a more joined up strategy so that if you are a tourist or someone coming from the outside, you know where to go when, rather than having everyone compete with everyone, even within the same country. So I think that maybe having the national and local approach be a little bit more coordinated would be really useful. And then to the extent that you're trying to bring people in, including entrepreneurs, explain to them why they should come, because nowadays people have lots of options and very little time to make their decisions, and you just need to make it really, really clear and easy for them.
So you mentioned the UK a few times, and Spain, obviously countries you're familiar with, but is it, obviously we saw Santiago Camps give us a presentation on Colombia, and I'm delighted to say in a minute's time we're going to hear from the Vice Minister for Tourism of Colombia, who's on our ministerial panel. Is there a country, are there countries, examples of where you think the strategy is almost there?
From the entrepreneurial perspective, I think you see places like Sweden doing a really good job. They've kind of really defined what they consider to be their value add, even though maybe a priori it wouldn't be the most touristic destination in your head. Like definitely if you're an entrepreneur thinking about where to go to start a business, or if you're an investor thinking about where to go to invest in a business, they've come up with a really clear value proposition that makes it clear from the investor and entrepreneur point of view why you would go there. I think Israel is another example of where they've done that really well, combining the fact that, okay, despite the kind of issues, political issues that might be there, they definitely prioritize the tourism as an example, and the traits of the area, the sun, the beach, and all that kind of stuff, as an attractive reason for entrepreneurs to want to go there, set up their companies, and investors to go look at the local populations as well. So I think those may be two examples where they have really clear value propositions, whereas everyone else just seems to be trying to say we're like the next Silicon Valley, without anything more than that. And I think that if you don't understand like what is the base of your value, then it's hard to differentiate.
Forgive me, partly because it attracts investment as well.
Yes, but I think it's this kind of virtuous cycle, right? Like a lot of people are saying you should go to Barcelona because it's a wonderful place to live, and at the same time you can do good business. Israel might be something of the same, Sweden a little bit less so, but they have enough cases of success. So I think that's increasingly what people are focusing on.
I just wanted to mention Sweden is one of our clients, and they have a very clear invest strategy, but they're also constantly pioneering and trying and experimenting with new things. So one of the things we've launched recently is something called 4 Footprints, where if we're advertising to audiences, digitally we understand now where they're going to go within Sweden. So we can say to Sweden, we've done this marketing campaign, I can tell you that Gothenburg paid for it and these other regions paid for it, and I can tell you where those tourists we've advertised to arrived, whether they've arrived in a rural location or not. And it's that type of ability to try something new and constantly in this world test the boundaries and do something new, which I think is what makes it an exciting destination to watch.
Yeah, especially if we're just learning how to harness the data and understand the data and analyze it. Now, as promised, we're going to talk about female empowerment. Now, whether or not people in rural areas, women who are hopefully going to be brought up and have their lives transformed by this rural development, may become entrepreneurs, maybe not, or whether it's something smaller. And how do you think this project can make a difference for women's lives around the world?
So I think it can make a massive difference, but particularly thinking about those rural areas and where females may be less empowered. I think the real opportunity, so what we've been thinking about is how do we use that data to actually make it easier for people to be creative, to do their own jobs, to be entrepreneurs, rather than to have to be advertisers, to be able to speak different languages and so on. So I think the real opportunity is things like, Google Maps allowing people to be discoverable so that they can know if the local pharmacy is there or visit any local businesses which are in the area. I think we're also seeing a lot of people using Google Translate. So previously when someone wanted to be in the tourism industry, they might need to really learn different languages so that they can welcome tourists. Whereas actually what this allows is people who may not have an education, which could often relate to females who may be in rural areas and deprived in that sense, using Google Translate to be able to talk to local tourists, and I think that really opens up kind of opportunities in that sense.
And I was just going to say, I don't think that entrepreneurs only have to be Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, I think you can have a lot of these people in these areas that are micro-entrepreneurs. So when I've been to South Africa, for example, and you look at their local ecosystem, some of the things that people are doing would be take a tour of a township and stay at a kind of Airbnb experience in a township, right? Because they know that people want like different experiences. And a lot of what's happening is to try and figure out how you can help micro-entrepreneurs, which are basically people who are trying to make ends meet, but they can use technology and entrepreneurial way of thinking to kind of improve their life chances, which is at the end of the day is what we're trying to do. One of our companies that's doing that is a company called WeFarm, and all they do is they kind of allow farmers to use mobile technology to ask questions like, why is my chicken dying? And someone else can basically answer the question, and then all of a sudden they can increase the kind of yield or whatever on their chicken. So it's kind of like, I think that the entrepreneurs aren't just like tech entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and the online community can also help root the community where it is, as you're saying before.
So yeah, that's a great point. We have to think, why would you actually go from Marseille and take a trip out to see sunflowers or see the lavender fields or, go and see art? I mean, you're going to go to these rural areas, to these very small towns, the south of France, just because they are beautiful. So you need the farmer that is working and growing those sunflowers. You want them to stay there. You want them to thrive survive, to sell their goods, to have a marketplace for that. You need the person at the market that is going to, on Sunday mornings, open up their little tent and put their soaps out there, and you'll buy from them, and you can pay any way that you want. So as we drive tourism in rural areas, let's think that, yes, we need this whole ecosystem to make it attractive, to make people want to go. So it's not just like I'm going to go to the typical vineyard. I'm just going to go and take a walk, in this Ingordé, and just indulge myself with, excellent food where locals eat. So I think that, and that's where the training is important, and this is where, we want to make sure, as we digitize payments and we give them the opportunity to take digital payments in that market in the middle of the square, is that they know then how to use it, how to use a POS, how to manage cash flow, how to record their transactions. And we do this a lot with women, because women are also at the center and a strategic pillar for all these small businesses. And we do it from India to Latin America, anywhere.
Of course, and it's not just online connectivity that is the backbone to all of this. It's actually physical infrastructure to get from one part of the country to the next, to get out to those rural areas. Now, we're going to wrap up the private part of the panel, but I want to ask each of our panelists for a recommendation and a question that you want answered by the ministerial debate that is set to happen. So, Sarah?
So you want a recommendation?
What would you like to hear from the ministers? What would you like to hear as a commitment that you think would be helpful as a springboard to actually make change?
What we have seen when we look at the destinations that they are being more successful in terms of becoming smarter and more sustainable, because I believe the two of them are, go together, it's establishing a process, a three-step process, which is very simple. Learning, understand, what travelers are coming, who you would like to attract, and how they are also behaving, what are your goals. So this is more strategic piece. The second one, it's acting. Give an action on that, act on it, like find them, speak to them, communicate, engage with digital advertisement and also offline, but really like engage in the right moment at the right time with the right content. So what this communication you're creating with the travelers is relevant. And the third and most important, it's measure. Measure and modify. Really look at what you have done. It's actually working, and if not, you can modify it and start again.
As Debbie was saying, it's all about pioneering and trying something new.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I think it's what I said before, which would be, given that nowadays everyone has loads of choices, what are the incentives to kind of go to your jurisdiction or to your area? And then what's the differentiation? Because I do think that's the key to any business or to any successful proposition. Understanding why you and why should I even look at you?
Okay. Diana?
What I would like to ask, and it would be how to become your strategic partner. We can certainly help, from the data perspective, providing apps, obviously the network, the digitalization. But then, for those economic goals for the country, for the development of the countries, how can we support as a partner, as a long-term partner? And then tactically, how can we support the immediate needs?
I think there's been a huge amount of information about data here. I'd ask, how can you as ministers of tourism really work this data, take advantage of it, and think about the impact of the visitor economy on your rural communities for the future? What can we do new? What can we do which is different to really change the way we work?
Thank you.
And I'd love to hear kind of a discussion around challenges and opportunities. So what does the future hold and what does the present hold, so that we can really think, how can we support you on that, and how can we kind of work together to make sure that we can help achieve your objectives?
Well, thank you very much to our panelists, and Debbie, Diana, Gary, and also Sarah. Thank you for that enlightened debate. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with those remarks, it is time for me to move to the next stage. Thank you to our guests. And to put some of those questions to our panel of ministers, it's time for the ministerial debate, where, of course, just as we had before there, we have limited time, and I will appeal to brevity from our panelists, but
Thank you very much, everybody who's here. Let me just start out by introducing our ministers. As you probably know, His Excellency the Secretary General, Zurab Pololikashvili, Secretary General of the UNWTO. As I introduced before, we also have His Excellency Ahmed Al-Khatib from Saudi Arabia. We do, exactly. The Minister, let's just say the Minister of Air and Transport from Senegal. I believe we also have the Minister of Tourism from Sri Lanka. Oh, sorry,
yes,
excuse me.
because you've got a lot of people who were absent.
Yes,
and we just,
of course.
took the
Fine. I will try and take note of who's here from what I can see. Thank you.
To substitute some of them. So we've changed, so it's good for them to introduce themselves.
Okay, thank you. So I understand there's been quite a few changes since I've been on that panel. So apparently you're going to introduce yourselves. So I'll start from the right then, if that's all right. Start from the left then.
Okay. Mohammed Kubati, I'm the Minister of Tourism from Yemen. If you know
excuse me, yes, of course, I see that the name tag is different.
Yes.
Apologies.
Jorge Mario Chajón, Ministro de Turismo de Guatemala.
Guatemala, right, thank you.
Ivan Skilson, Minister of Tourism of Panama.
Panama, okay, thank you.
Danny Clausen, Minister of Tourism from Albania.
Albania, thank you.
Marcelo Arce, Vice Minister of Tourism of Bolivia.
Julián Guerrero, Viceministro de Turismo de Colombia.
Memunatu Prat, Minister of Tourism, Sierra Leone.
Hello everyone, Rita Marques from Portugal.
Indeed.
Good morning everyone, Gloria Guevara from WTTC, World Tourism Council.
Thank you very much everybody. Apologies, I hadn't realized that the place settings had changed. Secretary General, let me come to you first to ask what you made of that. Did you find the private sector reaction slightly different to what you'd expect? How did you find that as a springboard for the conversation?
I think that it's okay. Oh yeah.
Yes.
I think that the discussion or recommendations was made just during this last 30 minutes are very useful for all of us. We need to bring on board all these fantastic professionals and companies which can support and help to develop and to put more innovation in countryside. Many countries, they have it, many of them not. This is our main challenge and this is our role, and that's why we need to be together. It's impossible to do it, to develop from our organization or from one country. We need, again, and as you saw, we have numbers of very interesting examples, numbers of very interesting showcases, and our role, like UNWTO, is to export and to support member states to see how, for example, it was mentioned, Spain made it. Portugal is another excellent case. France, Italy, I mean, there are some countries who already done these exercises, and there are some countries who are waiting and who are willing to do. That's why our role is to put all these players together and to help them to develop.
Indeed,
Pardon, London is a very example, and UK is a very nice example. We met yesterday with the minister. Again, 70% of people who are coming in London, we are going from London. They never go outside, and this is another strategy United Kingdom wants to expand. And imagine the United Kingdom, one of the most important players in tourism.
Yes, indeed. In fact, on the way in, I was just refreshing my memory about how one of the technology giants, I believe it's Amazon, is working with rural England to try and spread out the tourist load to go and view other parts of the United Kingdom. I'm so glad that you mentioned that.
Again, we are ready to put all these nice and interesting ideas and to expand to help countries. I don't know, if Sierra Leone, if we need to promote rural tourism, there we can, one example like Portugal next to minister, no? This is, of course, all countries are different, all countries has different culture, different traditions, but innovation we need everywhere. This is
indeed
how I see it.
Your Excellency, to the Minister of Tourism for Sierra Leone, obviously there are infrastructure challenges, there are connectivity challenges that we discussed there. What do you think the most transformative investments that your country can make can be in the near future to try and develop rural tourism in your country?
I think for a country like Sierra Leone, the first thing we have to consider is to how do we deploy investment in tourism in rural areas. Because if you deploy investment in tourism in rural areas, what that implies is that you're actually deploying development. Because if you look at some of those rural areas, they are far deprived areas. There are challenges with access to road. There are challenges that has to do with electricity. There are challenges which also has to do with education and skills. So in essence, looking at the discussion around technology for rural development when it comes to tourism is really about development in rural areas. And we have to consider that in a country like Sierra Leone, we have a large number of youthful population that are living in some of these areas. And we are still struggling with urbanization in terms of a lot of people wanting to come to the urban cities because of lack of these facilities. So what we are saying is that once we deploy technology for rural development, we're actually responding to the national and development needs of the country. It means you're talking about education, you're talking about training, you're talking about rural water supply, you're talking about electricity, you're talking about roads, you're talking about changing the lives of young people. The other point I would like to make is that we need to be conscious, not only in Sierra Leone, but in many parts of the world, that there is a rural-urban digital divide. And that divide, to some extent, disadvantages some countries. So you may think about how many people in the population can be able to have access to some of this technology. But one big advantage which you have is mobile technology. Mobile technology has really infiltrated quite a number of rural areas across in Africa. Let's to speak about Sierra Leone. So how can we talk about rural development, rural technology, but how can we work around things like mobile technology so that people can use mobile technology to change their lives and to do quite a number of things? I think, again, the other point is about appropriate technology because of rural areas, so that we have a situation wherein we can be able to ensure that we deploy technology that can be able to be very transformative in terms of responding to the sustainable development goals, responding to long-term sustainable tourism, responding long-term sustainable development. I think this is the perspective as a government, and I'm sure it applies to a number of countries in Africa, and really that is why we are all now turning to tourism as the new vogue, as the new way to go. Because if we put attention on tourism, we are actually changing the development mode of many of the destinies of our countries.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Julian Guerrero from Colombia. Your country was highlighted there in that presentation by Santiago Camps earlier. And in fact, in the past, we've also talked about how you've been using big data. So I suppose the question is does the investment automatically follow if you have the data, or do you need the investment first before the data? It's sort of a chicken and egg scenario here, isn't it, in terms of getting that tourism out to other parts of the country?
Yes, thank you very much, Nina. And let me start by saying that I want to commend the Secretary General for having chosen the topic of rural tourism as next year's topic for UNWTM. I think it's very relevant for several reasons. One of them is to kind of balance the trend in urbanization that we are seeing today. Recently, WTTC came out with a report on smart cities, and we see that there is a growing trend to a growing population in urban centers, and I think that there is a need to balance that out. It also helps to alleviate situations like over-tourism, where we're seeing this agglomeration of too numerous tourists, especially here in Europe, for example, and we need to diversify and alleviate, and I think rural tourism could help alleviate that over-tourism situation. Obviously, it's a good source of income in addition for farmers and peasants in the countryside to be able, especially now when they have diminishing incomes coming from agriculture, that they can have access through tourism to a higher number. And lastly, I see that it is relevant as well in terms of recovering and keeping traditions, handcrafts, culture, gastronomy, these things, when there is a growing trend of urbanization, rural areas tend to disappear and their richness and tradition and culture is lost. And I believe rural tourism has that power to recover and give visibility to culture that is otherwise lost. But going back to your your question, I think both aspects are very, very relevant. And I think that we have to move to an evidence-based decision-making process. We, in Colombia, for example, we use approximately 13 databases. We use national ones, but we also use Amadeus, for example, IATA, Visa, databases that help us see the level of spending in different areas in Colombia. But then you have, once you have the data, you need to create the right incentives to attract that type of investment into rural areas. We have a law, for example, in Colombia, we have been giving 100% income tax, exemption income tax for investment in hotel infrastructure for the last maybe 15 years. But now we've changed that law to make it more attractive for rural investment. So we differentiate towns or municipalities of more or less 200,000 inhabitants, and then we have a better incentive for those investments that are taking place in towns that have a lower number of inhabitants. So trying to attract investment into the rural areas.
Gloria Guevara, as the CEO of the WTTC, as you just heard the Vice Minister mention, your work and your research is essential as a sort of bedrock, as a springboard, if you like, to try and get this investment into rural areas to unlock the potential.
Yes, well, first of all, we do a lot of research. We quantify the economic impact of 185 countries around the world. That's how we know that 10.4% of the global GDP, that's a contribution of travel and tourism. And as the minister pointed out quite well in his speech, from all the jobs that were created last year and the last 5 years, 1 in 5 are in our sector. Now, that being said, it's very hard to ask the private sector just to come and invest in a town if there's no public investment. The best cases that I have seen, and there are multiple examples here, in Colombia, in Europe, in the US, and of course, in many destinations, including my own country, Mexico, you need to have a good plan and have a good public investment. Once that you have that public investment, the private investment follows. Now, if you don't have the money for the public investment, as the minister mentioned, you could do a PPP, partnership with the private sector or partnership with the bank, but it needs to be a public investment. Now, they talk about technologies in the previous panel. I would say that the data is important, but as you pointed out, is the chicken of the egg, right? The data should be used for decision making, but you cannot have the data if you don't have the connectivity, for instance. If you don't have the infrastructure, 5G to me is a game changer, and it was mentioned in the panel before. Hopefully, it's going to give us the connectivity that we need, but it's very important to do this in steps. Have a clear plan, followed by the investment from the public sector. Then the private sector will invest. Then you can define your products and experiences so that you can put them on the shelf. And then you book, you sell, you offer the experience, and then you assess. So it's the entire chain. But you need to have the connectivity, you need to have the access to internet. And once the trip is made, as it was mentioned, then you look at the data and you look at the spend and you look at your segments. Very important to have segmentation. One of the best examples that I have seen, as I say, in rural development, and Secretary General mentioned this to me just recently, that he wants to do something about that, is the magical towns in Mexico. 100 very small locations. And here we have some secretaries of tourism of Mexico. Imagine a town that has 5,000 citizens and receives 20,000 visitors every weekend. 20,000. They just live from that activity. And as the minister pointed out quite well, they live in their own hometown. They don't have to migrate. They have those jobs that empowers women, that empowers youth, and tourism becomes the main activity. But we need to follow those steps. It's very complicated to expect to hotels, and as I represent the private sector, to come and invest without a plan, without understanding of the segments that you're targeting, without the product that you're trying to accomplish. So you need to go do that in the steps. And as we look at the models throughout Europe, in France, in Italy, Spain, as it was mentioned, great cases of rural development, great cases in Mexico. Colombia now has been doing some work. In Africa, I've seen also some good models, as well. Portugal, a lot of examples there. So there's a lot of knowledge here. We just need to work together, but making sure that the countries really invest in tourism. I'm very happy to see what Saudi is doing, investing in these 5 huge mega projects, and perhaps the minister can talk more about that, because the public investment is crucial. That brings guarantee, and then the private investment follows very easily.
Well, let me ask you to respond to that, Your Excellency.
Thank you. I look at it, from like an investment side. The big cities today became all similar. Wherever you go, you see the same shops and the same restaurants, and we want to protect the rural areas. Please, let's protect them. Let's keep them authentic, and try not to convert the rural areas to become like any other big cities. For example, when I go to a big city, a main city, anywhere, I will enjoy the best fine dining and the best shopping and the sightseeing, so on and so forth. And that's why 70% of the people, inbound travelers to the UK, go to London, or 80% go to Paris, so on and so forth, because all the services and the ecosystem is there. But when you go to the ecosystem, the rural area, it misses a lot of offering. And let's enhance it a little bit, but keep it authentic. And there are 2 things. The government responsible of building the hardware. The hardware is the roads, telecommunication, and other things. The private sector will never invest in the infrastructure. And the public sector or the governments will collect back their investment from the VAT and other things, and the jobs created for the people there. But the private sector must come and invest in this rural area and try to keep it as is. I travel to the east to learn about their culture, and I travel to the west to learn about the culture, and you find the culture more stronger in this rural area. You'll find the local food. That's why the idea of Airbnb is a great idea, where you can go and live and stay with the family and see how they dress, how they eat, how they behave, and live with the great memories, And this is very, very important. Private sector will invest in the software, in the offering, but I hope to see in the rural area a local hotel, local restaurants, and local shops, instead of international retail and food and so on and so forth. I wish to see the rural area protected. We have to protect the rural area from the massive demand. Mm-hmm. The infrastructure in the rural areas cannot carry out hundreds of thousands or millions of visitors. It will destroy their infrastructure. We need to be very careful, because environment is important. Behavior is important. We want to avoid changing how they act, how they live, and how they, how even they welcome us. Language will be a very big challenge. My advice to everyone, including Saudi Arabia, if you go to Riyadh today, the capital of Saudi Arabia, with 7 million people, you are like if you are in any other international city. But when you go to the towns, you will find the old city, the old town, built of mud, and you will find the very traditional and delicious food, and you will find how they dress. We are a very big country. For the people in the north dress is different than in the south. The people in the mountain, where some of you might not know, it gets snow in the winter in Saudi Arabia, in the mountains in the north and in the south. They dress different, and they have a completely different food cuisine. So this is what makes me travel and go and explore these beautiful culture and experiences. At the end of the day, we travel to live with great memories.
Yeah.
You know, for we want to keep this great memories. 45% last year out of the 1.4 billion travelers last year traveled for Sanansi, 35% for history and heritage.
Yeah.
This is one. The other thing is sites. We have millions of sites around the world, whether in nature or in history or sports or whatever. We need to think smart in how to convert these sites into destinations. For example, we have the Mada'an Saleh, 2,000 years old city in Saudi Arabia. It is a UNESCO listed site. It was a site until recently. We are now converting this site to become a destination. So we built the airport, we built the road, we are building the hotels, but we are building the airport, the road, the hotel, and training the people, and protecting the area theme. So the hotels look like the nature of that area. And we will do our best to protect this rural area. For my advice is just to protect the rural area.
So be conscious about how you develop these areas, as well as different projects, whether it's
Definitely.
tax incentives for hotels, but also empowering the local population to take in people as tourists. I'd like to go to the Minister, Your Excellency, of Albania, because for a number of years, as a relatively recent entree into the tourism destination market over the last 2 decades, you've done quite a job of trying to spread the load, haven't you, to rural parts of Albania?
I am the Minister of Tourism from Albania, a small country and new entering in this business of tourism. But like the Minister, I am for the 2nd year in a row in this panel, and I just wanted to say my opinion in the way how that very smartly the organizer of this event has created this pressure that we are receiving from upper level of the business to the Minister. This is maybe the reality. We need to even accept this reality. The business is going much more faster than what we are doing, like the public officials. And even we need to accept that. And the business is leading this business. The private sector is leading the business of the tourism. But we, like the Minister, for sure, sometimes are even very difficult to connect with each other, to create a memorandum for understanding, even for us, for example, with Greece, with my colleague Harry from Greece, which we are neighbor by, but to find a way how to connect to each other is sometimes very lazy and also difficult. If the business of the private sector and understand that there is a business in the border between Greece and Albania in the coast, they will find easily the way how to make their business, to make a good business, to make a lot of profit, and to find a way how to create this, let's say, good thing for everybody. So work for the people, economy, win-win situation for them, good feeling for the country. So what I want to say is that what is our role? What we are doing like the ministers, what we are doing like the public administration. And I really support what our colleague from South Africa say, that we have a very important role to protect the reality. Right now it's clear if you go in any kind of the 5-star brand hotel or any resort in Turkey or in Colombia or in Greece or I know in everywhere, even here in London, it's very difficult to understand when you are in. But if you are going to the Athens and if you are going to Acropolis, for sure everybody in the world knows that this destination is Greece. So I think that our duty is both how to protect and to protect, how to create a system which allowed the private sector to go faster in this business. And we are all lucky, like the Minister of Tourism, that we are living in a moment that the tourism is growing everywhere. Even Albania, like a small country, we have received this year more than 10% more than a year before, and 2018, 20% more than 2017. So the number is going well for the travels, for the business, but we need to know our role, which is how to protect the reality, and of course to go what our colleague from Sri Lanka say, how to work more about the education. And in this detail I see even the importance of a meeting like this, when we need to accept the pressure that are coming very fast from the private sector, and to understand the role of all together, how to create in this industry which going so fast, to find the position of the public administration. Sometimes we are really in not in good position, because our duty is how to find a way to create a regulatory framework for this stuff.
As you quite rightfully mentioned, the connectivity is not just physical, it's also among countries and policy. And I presume the Minister of Tourism for Greece might like to respond to some of what you said. You have 33 million visitors every single year.
Yes.
I mean, how do you spread that out to the rural areas? You've already got some history of doing that actually for some time.
In a sense, we welcome 3 times more visitors than the actual Greek population. So it has to spread to the rural areas. We, of course, have some successes, and in one way we're more successful in that respect, because it's actually the city breaks which is not as developed in Greece. Athens has not been a destination up to now. It's really just a stopover, and the past few years visitors stay for a few days before hopping to an island. And islands are of course rural area for Greece. We have 6,000 of them, so it's a huge part of our landmass and our economy, especially touristic economy. But we have, if you like, a different kind of challenge than normally you see, which is the rural divide. We have the mainland, which is not at all touristically developed. So we have one issue, which is in the developed areas we're lacking the skill sets. We have a lot of SMEs. The Greek touristic sector is mainly driven by the SMEs. And Anne mentioned before the good work that Google is doing in the past 5 years to try to uplift the skill set of the SMEs in Greece in order to use technology in a much better way, in a much more efficient way, in a much more productive way. And what we're currently considering and are in discussions with them is how do we augment the curriculum with more soft skills? How do we give them the notion and the idea that they have to present much more authentic experiences and not copy-paste experiences. Try to build upon and create sometimes the identity by going back to the roots of what they've done, very much along the lines of His Excellency from Saudi Arabia, who I mentioned the same kind of mentality and the same kind of drive that we need to have that. But we also have the challenge of the mainland, if you like, which is a much more traditional challenge. Roads, connectivity, air connectivity, more traditional infrastructure investment that we need to put in place. And we've seen this happening the kind of immediate results that you have. We have 2 main big roads that were built, east and west on the north Greece and north to south, and that immediately put a small town, Yanina, on the map for tourism, and this has transformed the way that tourism of the area is developing. So, as I said, there's, and for that respect, I think, if I go back to your question, Nina, about chicken and egg, whether you use the data before or after, I think in those undeveloped rural areas, you have to work at the same time on both sides. You have to find out what the assets are, what can be marketed, but at the same time you have to look into what people are looking for, the searches, what data you can gather from that, and try to match or at least find the places where the gap is smaller.
I suppose it would be pertinent at this moment to come to the Minister of Tourism for Portugal, because technology was part of Portugal's tourism strategy 10 years ago, obviously when the economy was in a very, very difficult place. And I'm very conscious that as we speak today, the Web Summit is going on in Lisbon contemporaneously. You've done an awful lot to try and get tourism out to areas like the Alentejo. What do you think has worked, and what do you think will work for the future?
Thank you for the kind invitation to be here. It's really my pleasure, since I was appointed very recently, 2 weeks ago. Answering to your question, Portugal, in fact, 10 years ago, defined a very clear vision for tourism, and Gloria mentioned, the importance of having everyone aligned, public and private stakeholders. And in our case, the process of building up this strategy plan was a very bottom-up approach. So everybody is committed, everybody knew how it could contribute, everybody is committed, and we have this plan that is very clear to everyone, and so everybody knows what's the contribution that we are expecting from all the stakeholders. And I think it's very important to have everyone aligned. In fact, as you mentioned, since the very beginning, digitalization and all the technology part was part of the strategy. It was not one of the drivers of the strategy. It was one of the, how can I say, it was one of the DNAs of the strategy. So we use technology. Nowadays, we use technology in order to manage better, because we cannot manage what we cannot know, we don't know. So we need to measure before we manage, right? And we have a couple of examples that allow us to give all these metrics and to allow investment, public investment, but smart public investment, because we know that resources are scarce, so we have to be smart when investing from the public perspective. And I can give you a bunch of examples of projects that make sense to us. One of them is, for instance, we invested in Wi-Fi. So we have 300 municipalities in Portugal that we have a specific line, a funding line for that. So Wi-Fi is available in the major cultural sites and historical sites in Portugal. We do have a site that has all data available to anyone that is eager to get more information about metrics, about number of guests that we host every day, that the number of the revenues of the tourism sector, the impact on GDP, jobs created. So all those metrics are available to anyone and real time. So and also we have been, for instance, developing specific projects on innovation, following what you have said about the Web Summit. So the entrepreneurial skills of our staff, our people that work in tourism are very important. And so in the curricula of the tourism schools, we do have soft skills and technological skills in order for everybody that works with tourism be ready to cope with that reality.
And obviously it takes a good decade to get these types of initiatives up and running. I just want to come to His Excellency from Yemen. Obviously you're at a different end of this journey, aren't you, in terms of infrastructure and education, but obviously Yemen's rich cultural heritage is something that many people around the world would be very keen to explore.
I think let me first reiterate the thanks and as well the congratulations for the UNWTO as well as WTM for choosing this topic, which is quite relevant in the case of Yemen. Yemen, we have got 140,000 habitat in Yemen, different villages scattered all over the mountains and in different valleys and so on. So the question of tourism in the rural areas is very, very relevant to developing the whole sector of tourism in Yemen. As well as you have mentioned, many of our touristic attractions are also in those areas historically, whether we speak about Sheba, the Queen of Sheba. She is now, Mabrian is a very small town. If we go to Hadramaut, let's say the skyscrapers in the middle of the desert, again it's a small town. So the question of developing these areas as well, keeping in mind what my colleague here has mentioned from Saudi Arabia, His Excellency, the interface between general ecotourism and sustainability with the question of rural tourism is very much related. We're very much worried about this part of our country. When we develop it, to which extent can it actually affect the ecosystem and as well as the lifestyle in those areas? But we have recently seen that. I mean, take for instance, we've got nearly 2 million people who are now, you could say, expatriates in Saudi Arabia. When they come back to Yemen, though most of them come from villages and so on, you have found that they like to live in the cities. So again, to try and get them go back to their areas which they originally came from, you have got to develop. The question of connectivity, the question of roads, all infrastructure development is very, very relevant in this area. But the government has got to take that into its hand, as well as welcoming many investment in those in those areas. So this issue, I'm going to go back, I think, with a lot in mind about how to confront all those challenges, which were a great worry for me when I overtook this portfolio.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that the debate has been informative before as well. To the Minister from Guatemala, Your Excellency, how do you view the challenges and what can your country commit to try and make a difference?
Bueno, ya hablaron todos acerca de los retos que existen en general en el turismo. Uno de ellos es la conectividad, obviamente, pero fuera de los retos que tiene el turismo en general, a mí me gustaría hablar sobre el turismo rural. Para ponernos en contexto, Guatemala es uno de los países más rurales de América Latina, es el segundo más rural después de Haití. Y los atractivos turísticos de Guatemala están fuera de la ciudad de Guatemala. Hablando de las ciudades, como lo estaban expresando acá los otros ministros, podemos hablar de las grandes ciudades, como decía, que empiezan a parecerse porque tienen las tiendas iguales y tienen restaurantes iguales. En Guatemala podríamos decir que tal vez solo hay una, que es la ciudad de Guatemala, pero no es el atractivo turístico principal. Ningún europeo cruza el Atlántico para llegar a conocer una ciudad como la ciudad de Guatemala. Sí pasa con la ciudad de Antigua Guatemala, que es una ciudad colonial que es declarada por la UNESCO Patrimonio de la Humanidad. Pero digamos, yo diría que hay 4 tipos de ciudades. Las grandes ciudades, como podría ser Guatemala, que aplica a ese tipo de ciudades que empiezan a parecerse. Las ciudades que son en Guatemala, que le han llamado como intermedias, que son ciudades que ya tienen industrialización y que también sirven como centro de distribución para los turistas. Y luego las ciudades pequeñas, que ya pueden empezar a ser de 5,000 a 10,000 habitantes, que son como los pueblos mágicos que tiene México, pueblos bonitos que tiene España, y que Guatemala estamos empezando a lanzar nuestra propia forma de hacer nuestro propio, que sería pueblos pintorescos. Entonces, y luego sería el turismo ya rural, los que están en el campo. Guatemala tiene un gran potencial, por ejemplo, con productos como la caña de azúcar, de donde se producen los rones, como el ron Zacapa, que es uno de los más conocidos en el mundo. También tenemos un gran potencial con las rutas de cacao, que el cacao fue la moneda que se utilizó por los mayas y que es el producto principal, materia prima para el chocolate. Guatemala ha desarrollado algunos aspectos ahí, pero algunas cosas más de Guatemala para ponerlos en contexto. 9 de cada 10 turoperadores en Guatemala son micro, pequeñas o medianas empresas. 3 de cada 4 hoteles también lo son, y el turismo rural es sobre todo hacia el turismo comunitario. Se ha trabajado en las redes de turismo comunitario con Centroamérica, que hemos empezado. También hemos aprendido de Colombia con el tema de las estancias que tienen rurales, y hemos desarrollado también 2 convenciones a nivel turismo rural para lograr que las comunidades se empoderen. También lo importante y los retos para Guatemala básicamente ahí están en la competitividad, subir el nivel de esos servicios de las comunidades, poder tener capacitaciones y poder atender de forma correcta a los turistas. Desde los alimentos, Guatemala es un país que tiene más de 24 etnias, de las cuales 22 son descendientes directos de los mayas, y tenemos una gran cantidad y diversidad de gastronomía, forma de vestir y tantas expresiones culturales que mostrar. Entonces, lo importante ahí es buscar financiamiento hacia las MIPYMES. Desde INWAT desde el Ministerio de Turismo estamos trabajando un programa impulsa hacia las comunidades y que están actuando también dentro de las áreas protegidas. Pero lo más importante, creo yo, es buscar elevar esa competitividad, y esa competitividad se logra a través de mejorar las condiciones como la inocuidad de los alimentos y otro tipo más de técnicas que necesitamos para poder atender de forma correcta a ese turismo de alto nivel que llega de todas partes del mundo, especialmente de Europa y de Norteamérica.
Muchas gracias. Panama is an example of a country where lots of people around the world know Panama City, but they don't necessarily know, obviously they know the Panama Canal, I must say, but getting out of Panama City, what's your message to try and develop the rural areas?
Thank you. It's an honor to share with you in this panel. Similar to Portugal, I just recently arrived in the role as a Minister of Tourism, not as recent, but only 4 months. And one of our focuses is really how can we bring tourism development to the rural areas. The same as our other partners and colleagues here. We believe that the real heritage of the country is in the rural areas, and for many years, since Panama City is such a vibrant business center and such a modern city in Latin America, tourism has mostly been focused on Panama City. So right now, the focus is how can we bring and use the powerful tool that tourism is to bring development to the rural areas. And as our colleague here from Guatemala was mentioning, one of the main challenges for that is really how can we bring and improve the level of service? How can we bring training to these towns? And again, using technology, how can we make these craftsmen and how these people that provide the services, how can we help them and facilitate their being, and how can they bring their services to the world through the internet and through digital media, right? So for example, like this hat that I'm wearing, which is a World Heritage item from the UNESCO, we have a route called the route of the painted hat. Yeah. So, but it was created a few years ago. But if I want to know where I can get to see the craftsman that make the hat, right now it's not available. So the challenge again is how can we help these craftsmen and small businesses make themselves available to the tourists, and how we can help them improve their services. So there's a lot of heritage, both natural and cultural in Panama, because we have always been a hub, and we've attracted immigrants in many forever, ever since the Isthmus emerged. So we have many different types of cultural themes. Now the challenge is how can we place value or help these small businesses make themselves become known.
Thank you very much, and I take my hat off to you for bringing your hat as well to show us firsthand the fruits of that type of strategy. Last but not least, certainly we come to Bolivia. Your Excellency, we have actually met before, and the time we met, I remember you saying, I'm passionate about farming. I would describe myself as a farming tourism minister. This is really one of the things that you want to make a difference in, I know.
Definitely. I believe I'm personally committed to rural development, and I've been traveling all over South America at least, and when I see the statistics, I see a rural area that have shrinks in its face. Most of the people is old. It's people that have been left behind, most of them. So you have young people leaving their towns, going to the main cities, and with them what it's left on their towns, besides all the heritage, all the culture that it's living with these people, that it's part of their, how this culture is going to prevail, transmitted from one generation to the other. There's also big challenges that we have to overcome. And I think technology, besides working on big data, should be working on how to train these people and how to help them to overcome these barriers that have been imposed by the years, the changes on technology, and how can we train these people to deal with tourists and start giving and providing services. When we talk about rural development, we're also talking about empowerment. Part of the people that is left behind are women with small kids in part of the cases. So the education haven't been provided in enough, I don't know, and we should overcome these gaps on education. We should help them to overcome these economic gaps as well. I mean, most of the economy is based on the cities, and it doesn't go to the small towns and the rural areas. So I believe we should overcome all these problems, because otherwise the urbanization of the society, it's going to keep its pace, and we should find other ways to develop these rural areas, because our attractions, our main heritage, our biodiversity, our cultural heritage is based on these regions. So I strongly believe that technology can help us overcome these things, besides working just with big data. How can we provide training? How can we engage them into learning how the market works? Because most of the time they don't have the skills to deal with the market. So I think what's going to happen next year, and these discussions that are going to happen through UNWTO as a UN-based organization, to start focusing on the sustainable goals, are going to be a key role for all the society. And I think tourism should lead this way.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to our panel of ministers. My apologies to one or two ministers in the outer rings whose questions and points we haven't yet had a chance to take, but I'm conscious that we're running over time, and it is time for me to wrap things up. I do hope that you have gone away from this event with plans for the future to make a difference, as the Minister from Bolivia was just saying before. As we draw this event to a close, I'd like to point out that the UNWTO invites all participants to the launch of its global report on women in tourism, a subject that thankfully we've addressed many times during this last hour and a half. And that event will be held at the International Media Center. So if you head apparently straight out of this room and go left, it's on the opposite side of the Jordan stand. Thank you very much, Secretary General, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.